you watch a film, you either love it or you hate it.
And there's everything in between. If you watch a film and you quite like it, and then the rest of the fans and critics don't, in addition to whenever a film is scarcely talked about when you think...
Yeah, we get the point now. So yeah, in the past I've done 2 videos on underrated films. I've got a bit of a knack for that, really. And thinking back on them, they are quite important videos. I mean, the first one I did back in like 2018, it was one of the first videos I remember actually recording. And then the second one I did nearly 2 years ago now. That, looking back, is sort of the blueprint for the kind of stuff that I do now, the more film-based content, and even the way that video is presented, the thumbnail, the content. It's quite similar to my current videos and what I do now. So I kind of wanted to do another one in a similar vein, but this one's going to be a bit different. So once again, I'll be talking about a few films, this time 4 films, that aren't necessarily underrated, because the people who've watched these films I'm going to talk about generally quite like them. It's just the case of not many people have actually seen them. You know, whether it's a forgotten film of a famous director, or whether it's films from around the world that we might have heard of. I just want to talk about some films that I don't hear many people talking about, and I think they should be, because they're pretty bloody good films. It's also an excuse to talk about some films that I've seen so far in 2024. Now that I'm not doing the monthly rankings like I did in 2023, you know, I want to talk about some of the films that I've watched that I probably in any other circumstance wouldn't be able to talk about because of how niche they are. In this video, I can talk about some of these as, you know, forgotten gems. So let's just get right into it. So I'll go through the films in chronological order, so I'm going to start with the earliest film, in this case from 1963, Charade, starring Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant, and it's often dubbed as the best Hitchcock film that Hitchcock ever made, because it is a very similar tone to a lot of Hitchcock thrillers. You know, you've got plenty of twists and turns and suspense and double crossings and all these mystery elements. You've got Cary Grant, who, you know, appeared in some Hitchcock films like North by Northwest, for example. But I think that reputation, if I'm being honest, of it being the best Hitchcock film that Hitchcock ever made, it was directed by Stanley Donen of Singing in the Rain fame, he directed that. But because of that reputation, this film is almost in the shadow of stuff like Vertigo and Rear Window and whatnot. Whereas I think it's on a par with a lot of those, you know, classic Hitchcock films. I think this is brilliant, it's really entertaining, and arguably more accessible than some of Hitchcock's work. But overall, yeah, I just overall really enjoyed this film. The plot of this film is quite engaging. You've got Regina, played by Audrey Hepburn, whose husband has been found dead on a train, and it attracts the attention of his old World War II army pals there after $250,000, which he had allegedly kept for himself on a raid that they did once. And, you know, it attracts their attention. They wonder who they are. Who's Peter Joshua, who Cary Grant plays? Why has Regina's husband got all these different passports of different identities? You know, a lot of these sort of double crossings and, you know, mistaken identities and unknown, you know, all these mysteries, they're really engaging and whatnot. You know, I do love it when films really kind of keep you on your toes, you know, guessing and, you know, what's going to happen next. And I think there's a real pace to it. It never feels slow. You're always attentive and alert and engaged in what's going to happen. I think it's immediately, you know, the first shot of the train and the body falling out, I think it immediately hooks you. I think it's really effective. But the film overall, why I love it so much, it has a real playfulness to it. It's very charming and it has a great bit of humour. Not in a sort of irreverent comedic way like, I don't know, the Pink Panther or something. It's not really that. It's more just witty, a bit like a classic Bond film, for example. It has that sort of wit and charm, especially from Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant. You know, those two in the leads are phenomenal. I love them. They're really affable and charming, and Cary Grant, I think he has that sort of really comedic edge to him all the time in the stuff that he does. He's sort of bumbling, you know, he's endearing, and then when the twists around his character come along, emphasis on twist, because it's happened multiple times in the film, it takes you off guard. You're lulled into a false sense of security, and you don't expect it, and it happens again, and they can keep pulling this trick on you because Cary Grant is so effortless and endearing and charming, and it works really well. Yeah, the two lead performances really do carry the film. I think they're just excellent. But, you know, the side characters are great. You know, the old World War II army pals, they're quite interesting. And there's that one guy, what's his name, Scobie, who has like the mechanical hand. It reminds me a bit of like a Bond henchman. It is kind of cool. But yeah, overall, like, it's a really well-made film. The direction's great, the filmmaking and whatnot. The location works really good. The music, I really like that. That opening track, I think, is really great. And it's just a really fun time. And it's a blast to watch. So I highly recommend it. And just give it more attention.
Why doesn't he have to wait a few minutes?
Tonight is Mohawk night. If you had a Mohawk, you could go in.
Now, I have talked about After Hours before. I mentioned it in the December ranking because I watched it at the end of last year. But I wanted to bring this back up again because, yeah, when I did that December video, I'd only seen the film about a week before. And I wanted to bring it up again because After Hours has really stuck with me. And it's honestly a bit of a low-key favourite, especially of Martin Scorsese's filmography, even though it's nowhere near as iconic as a Taxi Driver or a Raging Bull or a Goodfellas or what have you. It's nowhere near as iconic, but it's got a bit of a cult following, and I think it's on the same pedestal as some of those other iconic films that he did. The thing is, this is very out there for Scorsese. It's more of a surrealist comedy more than anything, and, you know, if you look at it in the context of his filmography, like the 80s for Scorsese were a bit of a low point, you know, king of comedy. Even though it's revered now, it was a flop when it came out. Scorsese tried to make Last Temptation of Christ, and, you know, that's already a controversial film as it is, but also he had a lot of troubles making that, and this, After Hours, is kind of like independently fine. So the 80s were a bit of a low point for Scorsese in terms of his career, but honestly, I love this one, even though it's not one of his most iconic ones, even though it's not got Bob De Niro in it. I think it's still great. I mean, for one, the craft in Scorsese's films are always something that really stands out to me, and this is no different, you know, whether it's the filmmaking, the cinematography, you know, how it depicts this, like, kind of rundown area of, like, New York. I think it's really cool. I love how Scorsese portrays New York in his films. I think it's always really cool to see. I think just the way he uses, like, settings and props and the sets and whatnot, especially of the apartments of different characters, and it kind of reflects their personality and the colour schemes and whatnot. It's all just, like, all the technical stuff I always love about Scorsese's films. But the best part of the film is sort of the wavelength that it sits on. It's a very surrealist film. It's almost like David Lynch-esque. It's almost like if Scorsese did a Lynch film. But I think this film captures what David Lynch tries to do better. Like, in my personal opinion, I just prefer how Scorsese went about it in this film. I think the surrealist angle, how you know, it's almost like a dreamlike logic to it, you know, how it starts off quite innocently, quite simple, you know, it's a chance encounter in a coffee shop, and then it devolves throughout the night into something completely mental. Paul, he's got a mob coming after him. I mean, it lends itself to some really great absurdist comedy, like when he becomes at the end an art piece. It's so weird and so out of left field, and the different places and settings and characters that he meets, they're so colourful and quirky, and it's really bizarre. But as I say, it lends itself really good to comedy, but also it captures that dream logic, that thing of that feeling, like insomniac feeling of being awake at stupid o'clock in the morning and making dumb decisions constantly because you're not thinking right, you're sort of half asleep, half awake. And I think the film, just in the structure of how it's structured, it captures it perfectly, and it's really stuck with me, and I've been thinking about it a lot. And that's the sign of a great film, when after you've watched it, you still think about it. And that's why I wanted to talk about it again, even though I talked about it already in another video. Yeah, even though it's not one of his most iconic films, even though it's not got Bob De Niro in it, and even though it's a bit weirder than Scorsese's usual films, still give it a try because it's a really great film. And controversially, I prefer it to Taxi Driver. Moving on.
I thought I'd give you a lie in.
A lie in? Pull over now!
Fine.
So now we have Sightseers by Ben Wheatley, which this is the one on the list that of all of them is probably, I would definitely class as underrated in the sense of not everyone loves it, and I can understand why, because this is of all of them the most Marmite film. You'll either love this one or you hate it. It's a very acquired taste, and it's very strange and out there, the premise, but if you can get on board with this film's wavelength, you'll have a blast. And, you know, I want to recommend it just for the people who might enjoy this film, but it's genuinely a really good time. The premise of this film, it's this Brummy couple, Chris and Tina, who, Chris is like a caravan enthusiast, and he takes Tina on like their first caravan holiday, right? But they're also murderers, and it's a really, it's quite a darkly comic film. It blends this like horror, and it's sort of, yeah, it blends like horror with comedy and a sort of British sensibility to it, and I just think the tone, it's a really odd tone, but if you can get on board with it, it's really fun and it's really quite engaging. Now, I was quite surprised with how much I enjoyed the film, considering that Ben Wheatley films, the ones I've seen like In the Earth and A Field in England, I didn't get at all. I couldn't get into them. They were impregnable. They were just so alienating, and I couldn't get into them at all. But Sightseers, I did get into a lot more. Maybe the more light-hearted comedic tone helped. I mean, you know, Edgar Wright was a producer on the film, so that maybe has a bit of influence, but also I think the structure of the story and the characters, I think you can get into it a bit better. I think through Tina, she's kind of the anchor in reality. You see the story through her eyes. Chris kind of almost, in a way, whisks her away on this journey, and, she sees his sort of eccentric lifestyle. And you see the story through her eyes. But you also see how she develops and how she changes as a character, how she evolves as a character, and it maybe shifts your alignment and it shifts your perspective on, do we fully align with her or not? And I think there's some really interesting things of how her character develops throughout the film and how she gains a lot more independence as the film goes on. It's quite interesting. I just find the dynamic between Tina and Chris quite engaging and endearing in a way. They have strong chemistry. It's a very witty film as well. There's great dialogue and humour and some cracking lines that really did make me laugh. And, the dark humour and the turns and twists and whatnot, they're quite fun as well. And I think it has a real grounded British charm, which I really love from whenever I see in films. For example, there's this little running gag towards the start where Chris is really annoyed at this guy who's just leaving ice cream packets on the floor, and it's quite funny and it's quite relatable, but then you do have a darkly comic twist with how that's paid off. I won't spoil it, but I love how it blends the mundane relatability with this dark comic. I think it's great. It's a very sort of League of Gentlemen, Inside Number 9 sort of tone, and if you like that, I would recommend it. I think it's a lot of fun, but this is the one film here where it's you'll either love it or hate it, but still give it a try because I think it's really funny and really enjoyable. Also, bit of trivia: the character of Chris, Steve Aram, who plays him, he was in Doctor Who Flux as the Top Hat guy. So the more you know. And saving the best till last, Wild Tales. It's an Argentinian anthology film with 6 darkly comic short stories that sort of tap into the dark side of human nature in a comedic way. And it's a new favourite of mine. I adore this film, and please go and watch this film. Of all the films, please watch this one because it's amazing. I mean, I've mentioned Inside Number 9 in this video before, and I love Number 9, it's darkly comic anthology sort of storylines. This is essentially a season of Number 9. It's 6 dark short stories, and I love this film. If you're a Number 9 fan, absolutely watch it, but even if you're not, I think you'll still love it, because it's a blast to watch, but I love how it engages with the, human nature, really. The premise of each short story starts off quite simple. So, for example, there's one about road rage, there's one about a parking fine, there's one about a wedding. They start off quite simple and with topics and issues that a lot of us can relate to. I mentioned road rage, that's something a lot of us experience these days. Parking fines, a lot of us get really irritated at that. And it taps into that anger that we often feel about these things, and it takes it to an absurd degree where you have the characters, as a result of this, they will do the dumbest and stupidest and most insane things, but it's really funny sometimes. I mean, I mentioned the road rage one, which is probably my favourite of all of them. That's the 3rd story, but that one, it starts off with these 2 blokes, and they're just they experience road rage, and then they sort of get into a confrontation, and it ends up where one of them takes a dump on the other's car windshield, and that's not even the most absurd things that happen, but it's just bonkers, but in a great way. It's so funny, it makes it really engaging, and I love the angle that it takes. But even in the script and the characterization of who we meet, I think in that way the humour can be quite dry and quite witty, and it kind of has a British sensibility about it, even though it's an Argentinian production. So yeah, if you're a Number 9 fan, I think absolutely check it out. Yeah, I think the anthology format of the film works perfectly here, because as I say, you've got 6 different short stories. They're all quite distinct from each other in terms of aesthetic and settings and different types of characters and whatnot. You explore different settings and different scenarios, but it keeps the pace up. It's quite pacey. It's never drags at any point, really. And I think in terms of getting to attach with the characters, that's something an anthology film can falter with. I mean, I mentioned in the Wes Anderson ranking recently, The French Dispatch, that's an anthology film, and I couldn't connect with the characters, even though that's only 3 stories, not 6. Wild Tales does a perfect marriage of, the characters are relatable in the sort of things that they're talking about, so road rage, marriage, parking fines, so many different kinds of things. They're quite relatable, quite down to earth, and so a lot of the legwork that you need to develop a character has already kind of been done with the scenarios, so I think that's a great trick that the film does to get you to care about the characters, even with the limited time you spend with them. I think that's just a really great thing the film does. Now, a little tangent here, but it does have something to do with Wild Tales. So, Wild Tales is actually on the film studies spec that I do. So, obviously, I've mentioned that I do film studies at school, and Wild Tales is one of the films that you can study. I haven't studied it personally, but it's one of the ones that you can, if a teacher chooses to study it. Even Sightseers is actually on the spec as well. But what I do whenever I watch a film that is on the spec, like Wild Tales, for example, is I look at it in the context of why would the exam board have picked this film? And I often look at it in the relation with the exam questions associated with them. So Wild Tales is in like the global film section, foreign language cinema, and questions about like aesthetics often come up with that one. And Wild Tales is perfect for that because of the anthology format. The aesthetics help to separate each story. So the first one, set on the plane, it's very white, clean, it's like squeaky clean, upper class settings and whatnot. The next story in the diner is very gritty and grimy and dirty, and it's dark and raining and it's nighttime. The next story, the road one, is in daylight. It's out in the roads and whatnot. They help to distinguish each one. And I just thought then to myself, even the performances and like different characters, they help to do that. So, in the fifth story, which is that sort of murder conspiracy with that upper class family, they're quite sort of prim and proper and whatnot. And then the next story is the wedding one, and everyone's a lot more laid back and they're all kind of partying and whatnot. It's the contrast between each story is great. You don't need like a title card at the beginning of each one. You know when a new story has started because they're so radically different from the previous one. And it's done so organically, and I adore this one. So yeah, if you can watch any of these films, make it Wild Tales. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video of me just sharing a few films that I find go a bit under the radar and that don't really get talked about, which I feel like they should do because I'm really passionate about all these films. So hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think of any of these films if you've happened to have seen them. And also, what are some films that you find like overlooked and that you want to share that even I might not have seen or heard of, so do share them in the comments. But until next time, you take care of yourselves and have a great day.